Alrighty. We are live here for the first time ever, I think, on Prodigy Disc. We've got two-time Disc Golf Pro Tour champion, number 5 ranked player in the world, Mr. Chris Dickerson. Chris is at a campground. Him and Brittany were celebrating their anniversary this week. How's it going, Chris?
Doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Just excited to do this and hopefully give some people a little bit of disc golf content. How's that quarantine life been, man?
Kind of rough, you know. At first, when the PDGA said not to go play courses, that was kind of tough. But so I've been actually going out and practicing by myself. Every now and then, I'll go practice with Zach Melton, and he is. So whenever we do that, we go out to the course and we don't use the baskets. Yeah. We just throw shots, we pick up and go to the next. And honestly, that's rough. Throwing a good shot and not getting to finish the hole, kind of rough.
Wow. At least you were getting to practice and play a little bit, get out there. I saw you guys have been hiking a good bit, trying to I saw rucking as part of your, like, the disc golf strong workout that he's got you doing. What does rucking entail?
Okay, so we usually do, I'm pretty sure lately we've been doing it twice a week, but we used to do rucking once a week through the disc golf strong workout. And what that is that's wearing a weighted backpack or vest while you're hiking.
Nice, man. Well, as people kind of log on here, I'll turn it over to you and let you start your virtual clinic, man. Looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you. Kind of. How long does the collar last? 8? How much of the pills?
She said it's cheaper. It comes out cheaper overall.
Well, yeah. Okay. So we were going to talk about driving, actually forehand, backhand, putting, mental game, and a couple other questions that come up during. Did you say we're going to do the questions at the end? Okay. All right. So we will start with backhand. You know, I'm not going to do all the just very basics like grip and everything, but I'll hit the most important spots that I feel are what lead to a good backhand. So one thing I've been seeing recently, I've been doing online form critiques. One thing I have noticed is, so with your backhand, what you want to do, let me change this angle just a little bit there. Now, what you want to do with your backhand is imagine that your reach back and your follow through is all on one plane. So what I mean by that is if you were wanting to throw a flat shot, not up in the air, just pretty flat out in front of you, what you want is your release to be flat, basically with your shoulders. So what that means is your reach back is going to be on that same plane. So what I'm saying is a lot of people will do a reach back like down here, and then they'll try and throw a flat shot. So that's going to be really hard to do coming up and then out. So another thing is the best place to have your pull through is just below your chest, just above your stomach. So right about here. So that's where you get the most power, because if you're a little on the high side, it's hard to generate power. If you're on the low side, it's hard to generate power. So right about there, you just want to have that straight back on that plane, straight forward on that plane. Now, for Hyzer shots, sorry, not Hyzer shots, for higher shots, if you want to throw a spike Hyzer, your release is going to be up here. So same thing applies. It's just going to be a different plane. It's still going to be a straight plane. So if your release is going to be up here, that plane is going to follow down to here. So your reach back is going to be down. Whenever you pull through, you just want to go up. Same thing if you're throwing a downhill shot. If it's very downhill and you want to get the disc moving downward, you're going to release lower. So that plane's just going to be a little higher. Let's see. One last thing for backhand. So to go along with staying on that plane, I have noticed, so whenever you pull through, you want to make that 90 degrees with your elbow. So what that is doing is that's allowing the disc to stay as close as it can to your body on its way through. And that's going to allow you to get more power, because if you're out here like this, away from your body, you're not making that 90 degrees, and you're more than likely going to be rounding. That's going to take some power away. So closer you are to your body, making that 90 degrees with your elbow and coming through, the more likely you are to give yourself some more opportunity for power, accuracy, just because if you are coming through on that straight line every single time, then you're more likely to hit your line. Let's see. One thing I didn't touch on, back to the plane, your follow through. So it's going to stay on that plane. So if it's a flat shot, your follow through is going to come straight back around. If it's a Hyzer shot, your follow through is going to stay on that plane. So you're not going to throw up here and then your follow through is going to be like this. It's going to be up here and you're going to follow through just like that. And that will help your shot stay on its line a little bit better, especially if you're throwing a pretty flippy disc like a Hyzer flip. It's going to help you to hit those angles better. I think I've touched the high points of the backhand. We'll move on to the forehand. So recently I've changed my grip for forehand. When I say recently, I mean over the past year or maybe a little bit more. I used to have, so it's basically the same. It's still what people call a stacked grip, and that's 2 fingers on the inside of the rim. The only difference is I used to have the pads of my first and middle finger flat against the bottom of the disc, and I would come through like this. So I learned to do it that way. I didn't have a very good forehand. It was manageable, but it wasn't great. So I taught myself to take those fingers, kind of roll them to the inside a little bit so you have pressure on the inside of the rim. So what that allows you to do is instead of your wrist going like this, you're now going like that. You get a lot more movement going that way, and it's a more natural movement also. So what that's going to do is that allows you to get more spin on your shot. More spin means the disc is going to stay in the air longer, and so that's going to create opportunity for more distance. Now, it's basically the same thing, sidearm. If you want to throw a flat shot, stay on that plane. You know, straight back, straight forward. Same thing with like an upward shot. Now, as far as a Hyzer, so one thing I do like to teach people, and this involves the the planes we were talking about, but it's more of angles instead of heights. So if you are going to throw, let's say, a Hyzer shot, so you're coming through like that. For a sidearm, you want to somewhat lean over your shot a little bit. So as you can see in my hand, the disc is already tilted downward on a Hyzer. So what that allows me to do is come straight back, and on my way through, if I stay tilted over the shot, that's going to keep that disc downward like that. So as I'm coming through on that shot, the disc is going to stay there. Now, if I stand up, see how the disc wants to come up with me? One thing that's really important is your follow through on sidearms. If you come through and you think you've already let go of the disc, but you stand up, the disc is going to show you that you need to stay over on your shot, just because that disc is going to try and stand up more than it should. It doesn't matter if the disc is understable, overstable. If you throw the disc correctly, it should fly a certain way. But if you're standing up in your shot, it'll make it fly a different way, more understable. So same thing with a Anheuser shot. So it's not that you want to lean back. What you just want to do, instead of coming straight through like this, you want to already tilt the disc like that. And whenever you come back, it's more of an upward. That way, whenever you come through,
Can you
you're
take a couple of steps back? I think a couple of people are having trouble seeing all of you, and then maybe tilt the screen down a little bit.
Okay. Yes. I actually just looked at the camera as I was demonstrating that, and I saw the disc was like over the top of the screen. Okay. So, for Anheuser Shots forehand, whenever you come back, it's basically raising the disc up just a little bit. So you want to come, instead of like straight back, because it just doesn't feel natural. You want to come a little bit upward. So whenever you come through, you're letting go of the disc, whether it's Hyzer, flat, or Anheuser, basically in the same general area. Your release point should be about the same for all three of those. So the only thing different that you're doing is you're moving that plane up here. So whenever you come through, you're going to be standing more upward. So bring the disc up. It's already on that Anheuser angle. And whenever you come through, you just want to follow the plane however your shot needs to be. If it needs to be just a little bit of Anheuser, it'll be more like a flat shot, but it is just kind of coming through the disc a little bit more. So if it's a very sharp angle, it's going to be more over the top. The most important thing for a sidearm, and this is for form, this is for preventing injury, just stuff like that, is keeping your elbow as close as you can to your body. A lot of people, they'll come out here like this. So, I mean, you can get away with doing that, but what I've been taught is further down the road, the more you do that, you're going to see elbow issues, shoulder issues, and I mean, if you want to play the game as long as you possibly can, you should really keep that elbow in tight. So whenever you do throw a sidearm, naturally your elbow is going to be way out in front of your hand. So it's hard to demonstrate without actually throwing a shot, and it's hard to see without having slow motion. So it may not even feel like you're doing it, but just whenever you go to throw that shot, your elbow is going to be quite a bit out in front of your hand or the disc. So the important thing is to just keep it close to your body. That'll help prevent injury. And it'll also, going back to what I said with backhand, keeping it as close to your body as you can, it'll keep you on that line. Same thing with sidearm. So if you're here and you're hitting a straight line every single time, you're going to be more likely to hit the gap that you're aiming for. Instead of if you're rounding out here, if that disc is coming on a straight line, all you have to do is let go of it then. If you're rounding, you've got to let go of it at a specific time, not whenever your body, it gets to the end of your throw and you just let go. You don't have to think about anything else. But if you're rounding, you have to let go at a specific spot to hit that the gap that you're going for. Let's see.
We can run through a couple questions while we're on driving. We had Jacob Standridge before the stream started on Facebook while we're talking about forehand. He said he asked where do you aim with a forehand? Like how do you get? You talked a little bit about Hyzer and Anheuser. He was kind of asking about releasing on a flat angle when you're throwing a sidearm.
Okay, so aiming. So here recently, I have started a new technique with my sidearm, and it was actually because I was doing a critique video for someone else, and I pulled up their sidearm, and I pulled up a Major League Baseball pitcher. So not one that's coming over the top, but one that is an actual sidearm pitcher. And I was just talking to them about how they should be similar and how it should look the same. And it ended up that it's very, very similar. It's the same motion. The only difference is, so the pitcher is starting from a standstill, and they're generating 90 to 100 miles an hour. Disc golfers do a run up. So I've been getting a little bit of, actually been getting made fun of by Zach during this off season, because what I'm doing is I'm no longer doing a run up for sidearms, whether it's 200 feet, 400 feet, whatever. All because I was teaching this and it just clicked for me. I was like, well, that makes sense. Why can't we do that? Now, all that to say this. So what I'm doing is I'm basically lining up as if I'm on a pitcher's mound. So what that means is if I'm throwing directly at the camera, my feet are in line with where I'm throwing, and I'm looking over the shoulder. So what that allows me to do
to your right a little bit.
Here?
Yeah.
Okay. So what that means is to generate power, I'm going to have to use weight transfer. So whenever I come back, I'm beginning to load on my back leg. And whenever I come forward, so all I'm doing is staying on that straight line. So if it was a flat release like they had asked, so if you're coming straight through, what you're going to do is your hips are going to open up, I believe, hips first, then your shoulders and your arm come through at the same time. Don't really think about which needs to go first, your hips or your shoulders. It'll happen naturally. But doing this allows me to generate more power and stay, in a controllable movement. So for me, I could throw a sidearm hard, but it would come out wobbly every now and then, and I couldn't figure out why. Trying this, it has shown to be a lot smoother, or more smooth. So basically with a flat release, my aim point would be where my feet are lined up to. So if I'm throwing directly at the camera, I would line my feet up, and whenever I take that step, it's going to be in the direction of the camera. Now, if you're doing a run-up, it's the same thing. Let's say you do an X step. So right there, my foot is stepping in the direction that I'll be throwing. So all it is basically you want to visualize where you're wanting to throw, and then your feet should always be on that line, because what that's doing is moving you in that direction. It's really hard to, and this happens more backhand than it does sidearm. It's really hard to step off that line and then throw direction that you're wanting to throw. I see it, like I said, I see it a lot more backhand than side on. What people will do, the run-ups for backhand aren't exactly straight on the line, and they probably shouldn't be. But you can you see my feet at all?
Yeah, hold on. Let me resize you. I think this.
Okay.
All right, got it.
Got it? Okay. So what will usually happen with the backhand, here's your X step, and then they're not exactly straight. Your front foot will be a little bit in front of your back foot, and that's for just a flat shot. Now, with an Anheuser, your back foot's going to be a little further back. But what people, some people tend to do is whenever they do their X step, they leave that front foot way out in front. So now, if I was running up toward you and I've gotten to here, my body's wanting to throw in this direction just because that's the way my momentum's going. And it's really hard to come through at where I was aiming. So forehand, backhand, you just want to run up on that straight line where you're aiming. And like I said, the aiming point should be just a visualization. And what I like to do is just like a practice swing and just kind of get my body moving in that direction already.
So some of the things that you kind of touched on, we've had questions about is just getting that consistent release point, both sidearm and backhand. Just like, what would be, I guess, your one thing to work on if you're looking for a consistent release?
Let's see, consistent release point. I would work on coming back always on a straight line, coming back on a straight line and keeping it as close to your chest as possible, because what we're doing whenever we throw a shot, we're not opening our hand and letting go of the disc. What we're doing is we're coming back. Whenever we come through and let go of the disc, we're not actually letting go. The disc is just ripping out of your hand. A lot of people, I think the first picture I saw was of Nico. He had just thrown this shot. The disc was 5-10 feet out of his hand. His hand was in a follow through, but it was still closed. So all you're doing is letting the disc rip out of your hand. Now, the reason I say stay on that straight line is because your hand will get to where it needs to let go of the disc, and it should just come out of your hand. And as long as you're on that straight line, you're going to be more likely to hit that line. So I would practice your reach back, staying, on that straight line. And it depends what kind of shot you're wanting also. If it's a drive, you're going to be using a power grip. If it's an upshot, I would consider messing around with different styles of fan grip. I use a modified fan grip for, I have 3 different grips total. Power grip, modified fan grip for anything under a driver, basically. So fairways, mids, putters, if I'm throwing them, I'm using a modified fan grip. And what that is index finger, pinky finger under the rim like a power grip, but then the middle 2 fingers flat on the bottom of the flat plate. And I've found that helps the disc come out more clean. And then the last one is just a putting grip. 3 fingers fan down on the bottom, 1 finger laying on the bead on the bottom.
Awesome, man. One other thing, we had a question on YouTube from Garrett Davis, kind of about getting your timing correct, and it kind of goes hand in hand, I would say, with something that Rich asked on Facebook before we got started, and that is about engaging your hips and your lower body. I feel like timing and getting that engagement and your lower body kind of go hand in hand. If you want to talk about that a little bit, and you can back up a little bit so people can see your feet.
Okay, so yeah, as far as getting your hips engaged, you are probably already doing it and you don't really even realize it. It's very hard to just throw the disc with from your above your waist up. So you're probably using your hips already, but if you're not, it's just like I had to teach myself to do it. Nobody could really tell me exactly how to do it. And the way that I found that out, when I get to my run up, so my back foot is planted. As I'm coming through, I plant the front foot, and then my hips come through. They'll be coming through at the same time as I'm pulling through, but it's just, you have to focus on letting your hips do that if you want to see more distance. I was getting a little over 400 feet, maybe 420 to 430, and I started trying to get my hips more and more into it. And after about a week of just spraying shots everywhere, I started to see a little bit more distance. So it's just going to take some practice, and all it is focusing on your hips as you're coming through. As you reach back, you're starting to come through. When you plant your front foot, you just need to really open your hips. And, if you're focusing on one thing, other things may seem to, you're not going to focus on those. So if like you're trying to hit a line, but you're also trying to engage your hips more, you're probably going to forget about hitting that line if you're thinking about your hips. So I would suggest practicing it in the open. And, if you don't see results instantly, don't give up on it. Just keep practicing.
Cool. And I guess what's kind of your advice for putting this kind of stuff into practice? Like, how do you approach field work in terms of not just going out there to shots and maybe doing the same thing over and over? Obviously, you're trying to correct your mistakes. You're not trying to make them worse by continuing to practice them. So how do you kind of approach field work and making sure that you're making the best use out of that time?
Okay. So personally, I don't do field work. I just hate going to an open field and just throwing shots, picking them up, throwing them back. Now, I will do something very similar. It's the same idea as field work, but it's actually on the course. And what that is I'll get to a hole. Let's say that this hole is 250 feet dead straight. First, I'll throw a backhand shot down that fairway, just something that is flat and it's going to go straight. Next, I will get a PA4, and let's say I'm going to throw the same line, but that disc is going to come out on a lot of Hyzers. So I'm just trying to make the disc do something that they're not always supposed to. So I'm trying to manipulate the disc to get down that fairway in as many different ways as I can. So like I said, a flat shot to go straight, a very Hyzer flip shot to go straight, and then I'll go back to my bag and I will do the same thing with sidearm. I'll throw a Hyzer flip. I'll throw something that's overstable that flexes a little bit. And I consider that very similar to field work because you're still throwing backhand shots, forehand shots, and you're working on your timing, your release point, stuff like that. But you're also working on Hyzer shots, flat shots, Hyzer flip, turnover shots, just a bunch of different things. And let's see. And being on the course also, whenever you could putt, you could knock out kind of two things at one time. You could throw those shots, and then you get to the basket and you putt. however many times that you feel necessary. So my field work is basically on the course, throwing a bunch of different shots, making the disc do what you want it to do, not necessarily what it's supposed to fly like.
We've had a couple people mention keeping the disc level, not throwing nose up. Obviously, I would say that's something that, early on people have a lot of trouble with. So what's kind of your take on being able to pull through and keep that disc level, nose down, like you want it?
Basically, it comes down to when you're pulling through, the disc should be on that flat plane that I was talking about. Now, one thing I noticed with people sending videos in, they say, I'm trying to get the nose up out of my throw. More times than not, they are pulling back either straight or a little higher. Actually, it'll be better to see this from this angle. So they're pulling back either straight or a little higher. So whenever you're coming through, if your reach back's high, you're coming through here, and then see how my shoulders turn to kind of like meet the angle of the way the disc should be coming out. So what that's doing is that's making you swoop a little bit. So whenever you swoop it all, you're trying to push the disc down with your thumb. So whenever you come through and you're pushing the disc down with your thumb, see how that's making the nose of it come up? That causes nose up. And a lot of ultimate players will do this just because they air bounce their shot. So whenever you let go of the disc, you do this, and it gives it a nose up. It keeps the disc in the air a lot longer. So to eliminate nose up, it would basically be to stay on that plane and never push down with your thumb as you're releasing your shot. Just basically let the disc snap off of the fingers on the bottom of the disc. Like I said with sidearm, you're pushing through the rim of the disc. You're doing the same thing backhand. So I could throw the disc without my thumb being on it. It wouldn't go very far, but it wouldn't be nose up either, because your thumb creates, more times than not, your thumb creates nose up on the disc. And actually, one thing I didn't cover, if you do have a straight reach back, whenever you're coming through, if it's lower, that also causes you to push down with your thumb. Just because, so imagine if you're throwing from here, as you're coming through, the disc is moving downward, that disc is going to go into the ground sooner than later. And what you do subconsciously is push that disc down so it doesn't go straight into the ground. It'll actually air bounce, and it'll appear to fly somewhat straight. So if you have a lower pull through, you could be a little bit nose up.
Awesome, man. Well, the last thing for driving before I let you go on to putting, I think this will cover a couple of the different questions that have been popping up. If you want to just kind of go through your full, you don't have to do it full speed, but your run up. There's a couple of people that are asking how you keep from, rounding, having that reach back timed perfectly when that front foot is hitting to pull through. I know personally, I feel like my reach back is done before my front foot hits the ground, so it throws my timing off a little bit that way. And then where you kind of have your biggest acceleration in the pull through is what people have been throwing out there on the comment section. So just kind of walking through the run up and how to do that properly.
Okay. So my run up is just a normal X step. So basically what I do is I plant my left foot, so my back foot, basically on that line that I'm going. So if I'm throwing straight at the camera, my first step is in the direction of where I'm throwing. So from there, the next one is also in that line. And I don't have both feet on the ground at the same time whenever I'm doing the next step. So I have a little bit of a hop in my step or in my run up. So it goes left, right, a little bit of a hop back to the left. And the main thing staying on that line, once you do your X step, is getting your front foot on that line that you're throwing. So run up, just keep it straight on that line. Your reach back. So if I'm throwing a normal shot, I'm starting my reach back, it seems like, when my left foot is planted in the X step, or maybe just a little bit before that. So whenever I start the X step, I start my reach back. So whenever I get to the plant, I'm starting to come through. So basically, when you start your X step, that should be when your reach back starts. And again, this is probably a natural thing. I do have a friend that has a really hard time he's been trying to fix his backhand for a long time. And it's not his form, it's his timing. It's a little bit of his form, but it's mostly timing, because he'll think about, okay, so here's my X step, and then I reach back, and then I come through. It should be a fluid motion, just everything working together at the same time. And so run up, straight line. Your reach back should be like during your X step. And once you plant that front foot is when you should be pulling through. One thing I will say, I noticed this with a few videos that I've gotten over the past couple of months. You don't need to be over top of your front foot. You don't need to be leaning forward, but you definitely don't want to be stretching out in front of you and having your center of gravity back, because all that's doing is that's killing possible power and momentum that you have. Now, let's see. So you step through, pull through straight. Like I said, disc as close as you can to your body, pull through straight, and your follow through should always be on that plane. So let's see. Did I cover the majority of it?
Yeah. That's awesome. I'll let you go on to putting. I know we spent some time on driving. People had a lot of questions on that, so go for it.
Okay. Can you see the basket at all?
Yeah.
Okay. So for putting, like I mentioned briefly, my grip is 3 fingers fanned out on the bottom, 1 finger that sits on the bead, not under it, but for me, just personal preference, sits on the bead, and your thumb rests on the top of the disc. Now, everything is on a straight line, even putting. So for me, if I'm wanting to release, let's back up a little bit. If I'm wanting to release here, so I would be straight back, straight forward. So even for, let's say, an Anheuser putt, same thing. Straight back, straight forward, Hyzer, same thing. So what you don't want to do, your follow through should also be straight. What you don't want to do is have your follow through over here. And I'll give you an example of that. This first one, I will try and putt it at the basket, but I'm going to have my follow through kind of come off, and we'll see where it lands. My guess is it'll hit the right side of the chains, but probably won't stay. So, like I said, your follow through should be straight. With this first one, I'm going to pull it to the right. So just straight down. So see how my hand is over here. I just barely missed the basket, even though I came down straight, came up pretty straight, but my follow through was over here. Now, for this next one, just straight down, straight forward. So see how my follow through was straight? The disc actually went straight. Your follow through manipulates, same thing for backhand, forehand, putting. Your follow through makes the disc basically go that way. So even if you're doing everything else right and your follow through pulls it in one way or the other, that can mean making or missing a putt. So next thing on putting. So again, back to the planes. Disc golf's all about it. So let's say this is about the height that I want to be putting on. So it's here. You come straight back on that plane. You don't want to like come too far down or not down far enough. So whatever you're comfortable with, whatever your putting style is, and then you want to go back to right where you were aiming. So what I mean by that is just straight back, straight through. Now, if I'm here and I go further down, see how I missed high? It was because that plane was, instead of it being flatter, it was more of an incline. So what that does is whenever you come back, if you're reaching back on your putt, whenever you come through, you're going to be pushing the disc up higher than most. So as long as it's somewhat on a straight plane, it should be somewhat of a straight or flat putt and release. Let's see. Now let's talk about winds. That's something that isn't really covered very often. So for a right-handed putter, when I release the disc, if it's a headwind, as long as that disc isn't nose down, that should keep the disc in the air a little bit longer. It should make it glide a little bit more. And at the end of the flight, whenever it starts to fade off, it's going to push it just a little bit. So the reason is because the air is coming under the disc. So let's apply that to a tailwind. A tailwind, as long as it's, like I said, not nose up or nose down, sorry. The tailwind is going to be hitting the top of that disc and it's going to be mashing it the whole way to the basket. So aim higher in a tailwind, aim more where you want the disc to go in a headwind. You don't necessarily need to aim lower unless you're air bouncing the disc. Now the hardest to do are left to right, right to left winds. We'll start with left to right. Personally, I like tailwind putts just because I know I can run the putt and the tailwind should drop it. Whereas a headwind, if you run the putt hard and you get a weird gust or something, it could lift it over the basket, send it however far away. So similar to a tailwind putt is a left to right wind. What that does, it doesn't really affect the disc as it's flying flat. But the second that disc starts to hyzer at all, it's going to drop it because that left to right is getting on top of the disc and mashing it down. So it's similar to a tailwind. What you'll see is it usually doesn't affect it until later in the flight of the putt. So whenever it's 3/4 of the way to the basket, you'll see a left or right wind affect the putt more than a tailwind, or similarly, just because that's when your putt is starting to hyzer. Now, that is if you let go of the disc flat. You can make it act more like a tailwind just by putting the disc on a hyzer. So if you release on a hyzer, the second you release, that wind is going to be on top of the disc and it's going to start matching it immediately. Now for a right to left wind, this is, in my opinion, the hardest winds to putt in, just because if you release flat, it should affect it once it starts the hyzer. Once it starts the hyzer, it'll keep that disc up and it may push it a little bit depending on how hard the wind's blowing. Now, if you get a gust and it starts the hyzer, it's coming in smooth, you get a gust, it'll start to bounce. So in my opinion, these are the hardest winds to judge. Also because if it's a slight tailwind in that crosswind, you can put the disc out to the right of the basket, have all the faith that it's going to start hyzering in. But if it's a little bit of a tailwind, it could still hyzer in, but it could also just drop out of the sky at the same time. So practicing in the wind is really helpful, just because you're putting yourself in that situation to experience what the wind actually does to the disc. And uphill putts, downhill putts, they will also change what the wind is doing. Like if you're putting into a headwind downhill, you're going to be putting like this. So that headwind is going to be mashing the disc a little bit. It's a lot of trial and error, basically. You just got to get out there and find out for yourself how your putt is affected by the wind. Because, like I said, all of what I just said is if the disc is coming out flat or a little bit nose up. If you're a push putter and you come out a little bit nose down, it's going to be pretty different for the most part.
Awesome. Well, I guess we've got a couple questions putting wise as well. I guess what you mentioned in terms of trial and error probably has to do with Benjamin Dickerson's question. He was asking, how do you stay consistent with your putting? Is it a matter of that trial and error, figuring out what works best for you, and then just consistent practice? Or is there something specifically that helps stay consistent with putting?
Basically, trial and error. You want to find a putt that you're comfortable with, a putt that is going to be helpful in all wind conditions. So, like, let's say if you are a nose-up putter, if you just putt the disc and you push down with your thumb, so that's going to be really good for headwind putts. It's going to keep the disc in the air. Tailwind putts, if you do that and you don't get it high enough, it's not even going to get to the basket. So you want to find a putt that is helpful in all wind conditions, and then you want to continue to practice the same thing over and over. And what I mean by that is whenever you're practice putting, so you don't have your routine whenever you're practice putting, but I suggest getting to a point in your routine where you're going to be doing the same thing over and over. So let's say so my routine is I make sure I'm on that line and then I come back and putt. So if I were to do that every time, I would get 30 putts in 30 minutes. Definitely more than that, but it was just a joke. So what I do is instead of going, a couple pump fakes and then getting to here, I basically that's where I want to release, straight back, straight forward. So every practice putt there, and then again up here. So what that allows you to do is you're still aiming, you're coming back to where you need to get to in every single putt that you're going to throw, and then your release is going to be consistent. So I have found myself before just instead of actually practicing putting, I'll step up, I'll throw a putt, throw another putt. And both of those were different than my putt. They were more of like a push style. just because I looked at the basket, I threw a disc to it, and I didn't really practice what I had been practicing. So just whenever you practice putting, make sure that you are actually practicing your putt and not just throwing a disc at the basket.
Right. And then the other thing that a lot of people were wondering about is circle 2 putting. Obviously, you have a step putt that you're very comfortable with and do well with. So specifically, how do you practice your step putt? How did you kind of develop that? And then any good tips for people that are looking to give those circle 2 putts a little bit of a better run?
So what I do for my step putt is, so let's see, I think you can see my feet from there. So what I do, I start in a normal putting stance, and then my weight shift comes backward like a normal putt, and then as I'm coming through, it shifts again onto my front foot. So it goes here, and then as I'm coming through, here, and then out. So one that I want to focus on more this season. A lot of people say, step putting is a foot fault or jump putting is a foot fault. The reason that I step so high with my front foot is so there's no question that it is still in the air whenever I let go of the disc. Now, I think during this second off season, basically, I'm working on keeping that back foot on the ground as long as possible, so there is zero question on whether or not it is coming up after or before I've let go of the disc. So basically, have your momentum going backward, and then whenever it starts to come forward, I explode from my plant foot, which would be my front foot. So all that's doing is, whenever you're doing a step putt, you want to make sure that your body is moving in the direction that you're putting. So it's hard to do on one foot. So what I mean by that is, if I'm putting straight at the camera there, and then you want to step toward where you're putting. If you get a little bit off balance, so if you go here and then you step over here, it's going to be hard to putt that way because your body is naturally wanting to go in the direction that you step. Practicing the step putt. I'll do it not as much as my normal putt, but I will definitely practice it because you're going to be in that situation probably at least once per round. Mm-hmm. It's just something that you need to practice, and that's not specifically step putts. It's outside the circle putts. A better way to run outside the circle putts. So being outside the circle, you're further away from the basket, so you're going to have to use more energy to get the disc to the basket. So with that being said, using more energy, if you airball, the disc is more likely to go further past the basket than, let's say, if you were 15 feet. Outside the circle putts, the best way to give them a bid would be to have a confident putt, but at the same time knowing you're not going to go very far past the basket and have if you do airball, have a tester putt coming back. So it's not running the putt as hard as you can from 33 feet. It's putting it confidently, but knowing that if you do miss, you're still staying in a safe distance.
And I guess the last question, which kind of will go into the last topic that you want to cover in terms of mental game. Have you ever had a period, whether as a pro or as an amp, whenever, that you kind of experienced what people call, quote unquote, the yips, where you just struggled? You knew when you got on the putting green that there was going to be some sort of struggle. Have you ever dealt with that? And is there a way that you would suggest overcoming that?
Yes, I've definitely dealt with that. And it's not just on the putting green. I've dealt with it with driving, putting, sidearms, basically any aspect of the game. Even the mental game, if that makes sense at all. You can step up to a hole and it's a hole, let's say you need to land more on the right side of the fairway. You throw a great shot down the fairway, it's in the middle to the left side, and you get up there and you don't really have much of a shot. Let's say if it's a par 4, you haven't made it to the corner, and that's just because you didn't think about what you need to do beforehand. Now, moving to the backhand. One thing I'll notice, if during my round I've thrown a couple shots, they don't even need to be like back to back, and I feel like they just aren't coming out right. Meaning my timing is off a little bit. Usually what I can go back to is my run up has been a little bit slower on those shots compared to what it normally would be. So my run up is on the faster side. And what I'll do is if I have a slower run up, that throws all of your timing off. So whatever you're used to, whether it's a 200-foot shot or a 500-foot shot, always have that same consistent tempo in your run up, forehand or backhand. So by figuring out if I shank 2 shots and it's because of my run up, it's not just because I've thrown 2 bad shots. I will make myself run up just a little bit faster and, make sure that I'm getting my timing correctly. And I've had that happen during tournaments where it's fixed it. And I've also had it during tournaments where it had nothing to do with my run up and it was just an off day and I was just throwing bad shots. So putting yips are the worst. They are terrible. It's just an awful feeling that you can get inside the circle on, let's say, this really tough hole. You walk up to your putt, and if you don't feel confident walking up to a putt, likely you've already missed the putt. So you need to have it in your mind that whenever you're walking up to a putt, you're stepping up to a putt, you're doing everything you can do to make this putt. Not, I'm looking at this putt, what if I miss? If you miss, it doesn't matter because, you're going to have another opportunity to either make or miss. The only thing that matters is stepping up to a putt and saying, I need to make this. Not I need to make this, sorry. It's I'm going to make this. Now, let's say you have a 55-foot downhill death putt. You don't need to step up to those kinds of putts and say, I'm going to make this, because then you're just asking for bad things to happen. You need to kind of address, the slope, the wind, the distance you're at, and then make a decision on whether or not you actually need to run this putt or not. But let's say you're inside the circle, it's not windy, it's a flat putt. Just step up to that putt and feel confident that you're going to make the putt. Even if, let's say you've missed 2 putts, 2 holes before, or heck, all of them. You're on hole 6 and you've missed 5 putts. So this is going to be your 6th putt, actual putt during the round, not just a tap in because you missed all of them before. So you're stepping up to this putt. Don't think about those. You can't do anything to change all those bad putts you've already thrown. And I've done this before. I've thrown some awful putts, and I step up to like a 45 or 50 footer, and I make that one. And I'll have a conversation with myself inside of my head as I'm walking to the basket. I've done this a few times, and I'll ask myself, what was different about that? Why couldn't you have done that on the first couple of putts? But it's just about confidence. Just stepping up to that putt, doing what you practice that you're going to do, and having your follow through straight on with wherever you're aiming. You just want to do all of those things right, and also go into the putt thinking you're going to make it. I think that's probably the biggest part, because I know we've all just been goofing around. We've tossed a disc at a basket at, 50 feet, 60 feet, and you've made it. And you go, well, why don't I just putt like that? Because you never had the thought in your mind between just picking up the disc and throwing it. You never had the thought in your mind, what if I miss? So the yips, for the most part, they're just mental. Some of it does have to do with form. Not that your form is wrong. You're just not doing what you normally do whenever you're throwing, putting, whatever. So yeah, it's a lot, mostly mental. Some of it will have to do with form.
I hear you, man. Well, I know that had kind of, again, you wanted to go into mental game as a whole a little bit. So what are your tips there?
Okay, so I covered a little bit of it. So mental game as a whole. What I like to do is, whether it's a shotgun start tournament where it's 2 rounds in a day, or a tee time tournament. So I don't really care what anybody else is doing on the course. I don't care if they're absolutely just killing the course. I don't care if they're playing awful. That shouldn't affect me or anyone else as an individual player, because all I'm trying to do is go out to the course, do what I practice, and play the best I can. The best that I'm going to play isn't affected by anybody else. All you can do is basically just what you can do. Disc golf is a sport where it's only you out there. Unlike basketball, you have defenders. Football, you have defenders. Most other sports. Team sports, other people can affect you. Individual sports, it's just you. So with that being said, I always go out to the course thinking, it's just another round. I'm out here to do what I've practiced. And one example of that, the first Pro Tour championship, the second Pro Tour championship I went to at New World in Jacksonville, Florida. The first round I shot 10 under. It felt like a pretty good round. It felt like a really good round. I came in, people were like, what did you do that was so special? And I was like, honestly, I didn't do anything really special. I actually had a spot during the middle of the round where I didn't get very many birdies at all. It was either in the middle or closer to the end, but there was definitely a spot I didn't get very many birdies. So I told them, I just went out there, I did what I practiced. I didn't do anything special really. The next round, same thing. I shot a 10 under. I went back out. I didn't birdie the exact same holes. They were in a different order, but I still came out to a 10 under. So they were like, well, that's awesome that you did that consistently. And I was like, yeah, kind of. I just played the course. Like I said, the holes I birdied weren't the same as the day before. Not all of them. I probably had a couple that were the same, but it's just going out there and trying to do the best you can every day. The third round of that tournament, I shot a 13 under. So basically what happened then, same mindset, go out, try and do the best you can. And some of the holes that I had gotten the day before, some that I had gotten 2 days before, they just came together. It just happened to be a really good day. And, you know, I had more birdies than bogeys. That brings me to my next point. If at all possible, eliminate bogeys from your game. And what I mean by that is you can actually make your score better. I know it sounds so simple. You can make your score better by not taking away from your score. So let's say you have a birdie putt. You're 55 to 60 feet away. This basket sits on a decently steep slope, but it's a putt you can run. It's not a definite like, oh, that's a death putt and I don't need to run this, but it's a putt that you could run. So, like I said, you're putting for birdie. Let's say you go for it. You miss that putt, and with it being on a slope, that disc goes a little further away. Let's say you're 30 feet now. So you're putting 30 feet for par. Let's back up. Now you're putting for birdie again. Just lay that putt up. If you don't feel very comfortable, lay that putt up. You're under the basket putting for par as opposed to putting 30 feet for your par. So you're not going to miss that tap in putt. So you just take that par, you move on to the next one instead of having a decent chance of missing from 30 feet to take a bogey. Yeah, we see all of these putts that are just highlight putts that are for birdie or for eagle, for par, whatever. But if it's not a decently flat putt, you should really consider laying up, depending on how far or how comfortable that you feel, just to eliminate the bogeys from your game. So if you go to a course, let's say you shoot 4 under. 4 under is a good score. Depending on the course, you get done, you've had 4 bogeys also. So you shot even on the course. You're 4 strokes behind whoever's leading. If you were to just, and I've done this, I've thought about the holes that I've bogeyed during rounds like that. I thought to myself, hey, you're like 5 strokes off the lead. You're a couple of strokes off the lead. And I've had a good round except for I've done some dumb things. I didn't make a good decision. So I thought back about those, and it's taught me to be more aware of what can happen, basically. So just think before you give yourself more strokes unintentionally.
Well, we've got a couple mental game questions, and then we'll had a couple people that wanted to circle back to driving for a second before we sign off. Christian Rodriguez wanted to know when you knew that you were ready for a tournament. So Christian himself says that he didn't really grow up playing sports. I know you played football, baseball, everything under soccer, everything under the sun. So obviously that mentality is a little bit different, but how do you know that you kind of feel ready to sign up for your first PDGA tournament?
Okay. Yeah, so if you're playing disc golf, I assume that you have a group of friends that you play with. Kind of what I did was I got to a point where I was competing with the people I was playing around, and they had been in the sport longer than I had, and I had asked them, I was like, hey, but because they brought up to me, hey, you should play in these tournaments. At that point, I didn't have a membership. The next upcoming event was a monthly, so it wasn't even a sanctioned event. It was just a event thrown together on a Saturday or a Sunday. So I talked to my friend, and he was like, "Hey, this is happening this Saturday, this Sunday. You should definitely come out and play it." And I go, "Well, this is going to be my first one. I'm going to get killed." He goes, "No, there's divisions." I was like, "Okay, well, how does that work?" And he explained to me all the divisions: advanced, intermediate to open. The first actual tournament I played in, non-PDGA tournament, I played in intermediate. And it was a fundraiser tournament, so we were able to buy mulligans. I think I bought 5 mulligans, and I ended up winning by 1 or 2. So, like I said, that was an intermediate. I never played an intermediate PDGA tournament. I won the very first one that I competed in, even though it was just a local tournament. So from then, I moved up to advanced. Basically, wherever you feel like you would compete. So whether that's intermediate, advanced, or even open, if you feel like you can compete in any of those divisions, you should go into that division. And what I mean by compete is, like not just go into the division and run away with the win. You should try and put yourself in a division where it's players of your own skill level. And basically you'll know at the point you need to move up. If you're, like I said, if you're just going and winning every tournament, you should probably move up. But yeah, if you sign up in advance, if you feel like you're ready for advance, you sign up and you don't do so well, reflect on actually how you played. If you didn't play that great to your standards, give it another try. But if you feel like you played good and the field was just a little bit better than you, maybe step down to intermediate and give that a try. So the first one is always kind of difficult, just figuring out where you need to be, what's comfortable. But it'll be easier after that.
Yeah, and what are kind of the top 2 mistakes that you'll see amateurs make that they could kind of work on that you feel like would solidify their game a little bit?
First thing that popped into my head would be knowing when to lay up, not putts. So Kevin Jones, teammate, he gave me a hard time because we were playing together. I can't remember what tournament it was at, but we get to this par 4, and Brittany says it was GBO. So we get to this hole. It's a par 4. Kevin rips a driver, and he is going for this hole. And I lay up with a putter or mid off the tee pad. And I don't remember which hole it was. I wish I could to give you like an outcome, but I either took a par or a birdie, and it was either I lost the stroke to him because he birdied and I didn't, or we tied because we both parred. So one thing I see newer players doing, they will step up to these holes where it makes you make a decision. Let's say it's a long wooded par 4. The first thing you want to do is bite off as much distance as you can, because who doesn't like a 150-foot upshot on a par 4? Now, with that being said, if you come off the tee with a driver, trying to throw it as hard as you can or pretty close, especially in the woods, that's just asking for trouble. So in that situation, you would see better results just by either throwing a mid, staying in the middle, and having a little bit more distance on your upshot, but not to a point where you aren't getting to the basket. Same thing, if you feel comfortable with fairways. I know a lot of people feel more comfortable with fairways than they do with mids or with drivers. So whatever you're comfortable with, just you don't have to get to the basket to get a birdie on a par 4, or you don't even have to get close. I've seen people throw amazing shots from 400, 500 feet to get birdies on these tops of holes. So it's just making your own decisions. One thing I'll say real quick, when I was playing advanced, I would see somebody throw a shot and I would try and throw that shot. And if I hadn't practiced that, then that's just me getting myself into trouble that I don't need to. Just stick with your game unless it is an obvious shot. Like if you get up to a hole, somebody throws a forehand and you had never ever thought about throwing a forehand, but it worked out really like just great. It didn't get lucky or anything like that. Then consider like changing your game plan, maybe for the next couple of rounds, but never throw a shot on a hole that you don't feel comfortable with, because all that's going to do is just get you in trouble.
Right. Well, we have 2 more driving questions to wrap up. I know we started there, but maybe some people tune in a little later. Jamie says that he's spent some time on the field with a speed gun. He's had some shots between 47 to 50 miles per hour, but sometimes he gets up to in the like 69 range. Is that he says he feels like he's using the same form. Is that a timing thing that all of a sudden things start clicking on certain shots, or?
I see what you're saying. So usually it's between 49 to anywhere in the 50s.
Yeah.
And he said that he had at least one shot that got up to, did you say 69 miles an hour?
Yeah, he said in the like 64 to 69 range. So from like the 40s and 50s to the mid 60s.
Right. Okay. So yeah, if you're normally in the upper 40s to mid 50s, and you have a couple of shots to get up into the 60s, I would say it is a timing thing. Going back to these critique videos I've been doing throughout the second off season, a lot of people I see they have good form, they have a good run up, but it's like, so instead of just coming through and throwing, they'll go through their run up and they'll get to like here, and it's almost like they just completely slow down. They plant their back foot, they slow down, and it's basically like they're throwing everything just upper body. So it could be a timing issue. It could be that on those shots where you're throwing it a lot harder than others, you could just have all your momentum moving forward at the same time and not, stopping it. Yeah, without seeing like a video or anything like that.
Right.
If you're doing the same thing every time, at least you feel like you're doing the same thing every time form wise. Yeah, I would say it's a momentum, or I just went blank.
Well, Glenn asked for you to discuss snap on drives. I know a lot of people kind of talk about that noise that comes off your hand as kind of the snap, but kind of talk about that power pull through right there at the end to get that snap.
So most of the time, if I'm throwing with a modified fan grip, so I won't get that snap, just because really the only resistance, snap is caused by resistance coming off of the disc. So if I have a power grip and I'm letting go of this disc, all that's happening is whenever the disc is coming out of my hand, those fingers are just basically doing that. They're snapping back against your hand. So with a modified fan grip, for me, the only point of resistance I have is the pointer finger. I do have my pinky finger on the back, but whenever you're letting go of the disc, it's coming off the pinky finger, and your index finger is guiding it. So with that being said, there's almost no snap for that shot, even if I throw it hard. Now, if I throw it as hard as I can, I might be able to get a little bit of snap off of it. But if you're using a power grip, so you have 4 times the amount to actually get that snap, just because you have 4 fingers on the rim that are creating resistance coming off of off the disc whenever you throw. So like I mentioned earlier, you're not letting go of the disc. You're not opening your hand whenever you throw. What causes that snap is you're coming through so fast, the disc is ripping out of your hand. So it's a mixture between not opening your hand and actually throwing it hard enough to get that kind of that reaction.
And Shane was kind of following up on that, if the grip position on the reach back affects the snap at all. So I know a lot of people will talk about where your hand is on the outside of the disc and things like that when you reach back and pull through. So does that position affect it at all, or is it simply just the disc ripping out of your hand?
It's basically just the disc ripping out of your hand. I've watched my form in slow-mo, and what I've noticed is, so when I'm reaching back, my arm, my wrist, they're straight. So as I reach back, I've noticed that, see how my hand kind of comes out a little bit? And it's not on purpose. It's just a natural thing. So it comes out just a little bit. It doesn't turn as far as possible. It just comes out a little bit. And as you're coming through, as you start coming through, it straightens back up. Once you get to here, your wrist is bent just a little bit, and then it comes out. It's not too dramatic in one way or the other. So what I mean, your hand's not like this back here, and whenever you're coming through, your wrist isn't bent like this. No matter what you're doing, whether you're reaching back like this or like this, your body is going to try and get it to the right position that it needs to be whenever you're coming through. So, no, the snap isn't really affected by what your hand's doing back here, because, like I said, your body's going to try and fix it in the middle here whenever you're actually coming through.
And is that something that you feel? Someone just asked, is that when you're pulling through, and I'm sure your mind isn't quite on that, but do you want to make sure that when you're power gripping a disc, you feel that disc coming off of all 4 of those fingers and really generating that pop?
So not all 4 of the fingers. That's not what I focus on. Going back to what I said with the fan grip, I really only feel it come off the index finger. So same thing with the power grip, because the way the disc rotates coming out of your hand, the last point of contact is your index finger. So basically what I do is I focus on that index finger, and whenever I come through, I'm making sure the disc comes off of that index finger. I'm not saying, if you have a power grip, go like this. Definitely don't do that. If you have a power grip, use it. You get more distance that way. But whenever you come through, even with a power grip and having 4 fingers on the rim, the disc is still going to come off of that index finger last. So on some longer shots with drivers that I need to hit a line, I'll kind of focus on letting go with that index finger on that line that I need to throw. So, yeah, it's not all the fingers coming off at the same time. The way the disc spins out of your hand, it's your index finger.
And Chris wants to know any advice for throwing Anheuser and Hyzer shots I know you covered it kind of during the sidearm section, but specifically for backhand, do you change the stability of the disc or just your angle and your reach back?
Okay, so the angle of your reach back depends on the stability of the disc. So what I mean by that is I have a very understable PA4 in my bag, so I can actually throw it on a Hyzer. And the stability of the disc is so understable, it'll come out on a Hyzer, it'll flip, and it'll throw that Anheuser Shot for me without having to do that. Now, with these are just practice putters. Being PA3s, they're kind of beat up. They'll just be a straight putter. So what I need to do if I'm throwing an Anheuser Shot, if I threw it like I would that PA4, it would probably Hyzer on me. However, if I wanted to throw an Anheuser with these, being a straight putter, my back leg would be off that line a little bit, causing me to lean back. And what that does is that allows me to come through on that angle. So if you're leaning back a little bit, it's going to be really hard to throw a flat shot. So if you lean back just a little bit and come through on an Anheuser, follow through is also going to be on that same plane. So it's going to be up and then downward. So making the disc Anheuser out of your hand, depending on the stability, can create different kinds of shots. So what I mean, if you took the same Anheuser shot with my understable PA4, it's going to get to the ground very quick, and it's probably going to cut roll. If you do it with these straighter discs, it's going to go further forward before it actually gets to the ground, and it's probably going to land somewhat flat. Now, if I had an overstable putter and I did the same thing, it's going to go even further forward, but it's still going to be fighting over to the right, and it has the possibility of flexing out just because of the disc. So it does have to do with both the angle that you throw and the disc, but it's just finding a good combination.
Awesome. Well, I'll get one more question in here. Joshua wanted to know about keeping the nose down on drivers. I know we covered that earlier. Joshua, I'll try and find a time that we cover that and comment below a place that you can rewind and see that again. But the last question that will go is that their left foot, when they go through their X step, is pointing away from the target. Any tips to help correct that? So I guess just as you go through your X step, just making sure that you stay on line with your feet.
Okay, so what I'm getting from that question is whenever you do your X step, your left foot, assuming they're right-handed, is facing away from where you're throwing. So basically what that is, so this would be my normal run-up. See how I'm pretty just somewhat in line with where I'm throwing, not standing like this, but I don't have my back to you either. So by doing that, having my body moving straight like this and sideways, my feet are going to be somewhat sideways also. Now, if I tried to face you the entire time, my feet are going to want to be in this direction. Now, getting your feet backwards, that would be caused by turning away. So if I'm running in this direction and I'm already turning my back to where I'm throwing, my feet are in that direction. So all it is, having your feet in that direction, is you're overturning a little bit. So just try and stay, think of it as, like I said earlier, Major League Baseball pitcher. They're inlined, so their body movement is coming that way. Same thing with the run up. So if you get to that position and run up straight, your feet should be somewhat straight. They may not be perfect, but it'll at least get you on a better, or at least give you a better idea.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on and doing the clinic. You've mentioned your online lessons a couple of times. Is that something that you're still doing? How can people kind of be on the lookout for that to kind of get a little bit more one-on-one attention?
Yeah, still doing those. Just send me a message on Facebook Messenger or a direct message on Instagram. They are $30 a piece. So what that includes is I have an app. I'll plug in the video that they send to me. I can draw on that app. I can talk directly, and then it just records a video. I send that back to them through email, and that's basically the whole process. But yeah, we're still doing that. Just message me on Facebook or Instagram to get more details or to sign up.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for doing the clinic. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll definitely be looking to do this kind of stuff again. And excuse any glitches. This was our first time, but I enjoyed it, Chris. Any parting words for the people?
Just stay safe. We'll get through this eventually, and we'll be able to play disc golf again.
All right, man. Looking forward to it. See you later.
All right. See ya.